Welcome back to the Little Grey Cells, where we explore the brilliant mind and extraordinary cases of the world's greatest detective, Hercule Poirot. Tonight, we present a tale of Christmas terror, ancestral secrets, and spectral vengeance. A case that will test even Poirot's formidable intellect. So settle in, Poirot yourself a tisane, or perhaps something stronger, and let us begin. This is The Mystery of the Christmas Ghost. The fire crackled in the hearth of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting dancing shadows across the walls of his meticulously ordered sitting room. Outside, the December wind howled through the streets of Whitehaven mansions, rattling the windows with icy fingers. But within these walls, all was warmth and symmetry. Poirot sat in his favourite armchair, a cup of hot chocolate cooling on the table beside him, his small feet encased in patent leather shoes that reflected the firelight like mirrors. He was, in this moment, perfectly content. The knock at his door was therefore most unwelcome. "Entrez," he called, not rising from his chair. His valet, George, appeared in the doorway with an expression of carefully controlled disapproval. "A young lady to see you, sir. She is in a state of some distress and insists the matter is urgent." "At this hour? It is nearly 10 o'clock. "Indeed, sir. I informed her of the impropriety, but she was most insistent." Poirot sighed, the sigh of a man whose evening of peaceful contemplation had been irrevocably disturbed. "Very well. Show her in." The young woman who entered was perhaps 25 years of age, with dark hair escaping from beneath a fashionable cloche hat, and eyes that held the wild look of barely suppressed terror. Her coat was of excellent quality, but worn carelessly, as though she had thrown it on without thought, and her gloved hands trembled as she clutched a small handbag to her chest. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, "you must help me. They say you are the only one who can." "Please."
"Mademoiselle, sit down." Poirot gestured to the chair opposite his own. "You are chilled. George, bring some brandy for the young lady." She sank into the chair as though her legs could no longer support her, and Poirot observed her with the keen attention that missed nothing. Her shoes were muddy. She had walked some distance through the streets. Her lipstick was slightly smeared. She had been biting her lips. And on her right glove, barely visible against the dark leather, was a small stain that might have been blood. "Now," he said, when George had provided the brandy and withdrawn, "tell me your name, and tell me what has frightened you so terribly." "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. My father is Sir Reginald Blackwood of Ravenshollow Manor in Cumberland. And what has frightened me, Monsieur Poirot, is a ghost." Poirot's magnificent moustache twitched, a sign, those who knew him well would recognise, of scepticism carefully suppressed. "A ghost, mademoiselle? I know how it sounds. I know you must think me hysterical or foolish, but I have seen it with my own eyes. A figure in white, walking the corridors of Ravenshollow at midnight, its face the face of a dead woman. And now—" her voice broke. "Now my father has received a message, a warning. He will die on Christmas Eve, the message says, just as she died. The ghost of Catherine Blackwood will have her revenge." "Catherine Blackwood?" "My great-aunt. She died at Ravenshollow on Christmas Eve, 1888. 40 years ago this very month. They said it was suicide, that she threw herself from the tower window in a fit of madness. But there were always whispers, Monsieur Poirot. Whispers that she was murdered. That someone in the family pushed her to her death and made it look like she had taken her own life. And now you believe her ghost has returned to exact vengeance?" "I don't know what I believe anymore. Eleanor Blackwood set down her brandy glass with a hand that still trembled. "But my father believes it."
He has been terrified since the message arrived, refusing to eat, refusing to sleep. He says he knows what he did, that his sins have finally caught up with him. He won't tell me what he means, but I can see in his eyes that he is expecting to die. Poirot was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his green eyes distant with thought.
"Your father was alive in 1888, then. He would have been
20 years old, a young man, just finished at Oxford. He was at Ravenshollow that Christmas when Catherine died.
And who else was present?"
His brother, my Uncle Marcus, who died in the war. His parents, my grandparents, both long deceased. And Catherine herself, of course. She was their sister, my grandmother's sister, that is. She had never married, and she lived at Ravenshollow as a companion to my grandmother.
A companion who died under suspicious circumstances, leaving whispers of murder that have persisted for 40 years.
Poirot nodded slowly.
"Yes, mademoiselle. I begin to see. You wish me to come to Ravenshollow?"
"I wish you to save my father's life. The ghost, or whoever is pretending to be a ghost, has promised to kill him on Christmas Eve. That is 3 days from now. Please, Monsieur Poirot, you are my only hope." It was not, perhaps, the most compelling of invitations. Poirot disliked the country, disliked the cold, and, most especially, disliked the English obsession with draughty manor houses and inadequate central heating. But there was something in Eleanor Blackwood's eyes, a desperate sincerity that could not be feigned. And there was, too, the puzzle itself, which beckoned to him like a siren song.
"Very well, mademoiselle,"
he sang at last.
"I will come to Ravenshollow. But I must warn you, Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts. Whatever is haunting your family's home, I assure you, it is entirely human."
"That," said Eleanor Blackwood, "is what I am afraid of." The journey to Cumberland was long and cold, the train cutting through a landscape that grew increasingly desolate as they travelled north. Snow had begun to fall by the time they reached the small station at Keswick, and by the time the hired car had wound its way through the narrow lanes toward Ravenshollow, the world had been transformed into a monochrome study of white and grey. Poirot, wrapped in his heaviest overcoat with a scarf wound round his neck and a hot water bottle clutched to his chest, observed the passing scenery with deep suspicion. The fells rose around them like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in the swirling snow, and the only signs of habitation were the occasional farmhouse, its windows glowing with warm light against the gathering darkness. "We are quite isolated here," Eleanor said, noting his expression. "The nearest village is 5 miles away, and in winter, when the snows come, we can be cut off for weeks at a time." "Charming," Poirot muttered. "There, you can see the house now." Ravenshollow Manor emerged from the snow like a vision from a Gothic novel. It was vast, sprawling, built of dark stone that seemed to absorb what little light remained in the winter sky. Towers rose at each corner, their windows like empty eyes staring out across the desolate landscape. And at the centre of the building, a great door of ancient oak stood beneath a carved stone archway that depicted scenes of hunting and death. "The original house dates from the 14th century, Eleanor explained as the car drew to a halt. "But it has been added to over the centuries. The tower on the left, that is the oldest part. And that is where Catherine died." Poirot looked up at the tower in question. A single window,
high above, was illuminated from within, and for just a moment he thought he saw a figure standing there, a pale shape, watching their arrival. But when he blinked, it was gone. "Your father is expecting us?" "I telephoned from London. He knows you are coming, though he does not believe anyone can help him now. He has resigned himself to death, Monsieur Poirot. It is terrible to see." The great door opened before they could knock, revealing a butler of advanced years and funereal aspect. "Miss Eleanor," he intoned, "and this will be Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald is in the library. He asks that you join him there." The entrance hall of Ravenshollow was everything Poirot had feared. Cavernous, cold, and decorated with the mounted heads of various animals that stared down at visitors with glassy reproach. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, but its warmth seemed to dissipate before reaching more than a few feet into the room. Christmas decorations had been hung, holly and ivy and red ribbons, but they seemed incongruous against the general atmosphere of gloom, like festive bunting in a mausoleum. "Tompkins has been with the family for 40 years, Eleanor murmured, as they followed the butler through a labyrinth of corridors. "He was a young footman when Catherine died. He remembers everything." "Indeed, that is most interesting." The library was somewhat less frigid than the entrance hall, owing to a fire that actually seemed to generate heat, and the presence of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that provided some insulation against the cold stone walls. Sir Reginald Blackwood rose from a leather armchair as they entered, and Poirot's first impression was of a man already haunted by death. He was perhaps 60 years of age, but he looked older, his face lined and grey, his eyes sunken, his once robust frame wasted to gauntness. His hand, when he extended it to Poirot, trembled visibly, and his voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Monsieur Poirot, my daughter believes you can save me. I do not share her optimism, but I thank you for coming nonetheless." "Sir Reginald." Poirot took the offered hand, noting its coldness, its weakness. "I understand you have received a threatening message." "Threatening?" Sir Reginald laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "It is not a threat, Monsieur Poirot. It is a promise of justice, long delayed, but finally delivered. I have lived 40 years with the knowledge of what I did. Now the time has come to pay." "And what did you do, Sir Reginald?" The old man's eyes met Poirot's, and in them was a lifetime of guilt, of secrets harboured and sins concealed. "I killed her, Monsieur Poirot. I killed Catherine Blackwood. And now her ghost has returned to kill me." The silence that followed this pronouncement was absolute. Eleanor had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth as though to stifle a cry. Even Poirot, who prided himself on his composure, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the inadequate heating. "You confess to murder, Sir Reginald?" "I confess to nothing that the ghost does not already know." The old man sank back into his chair, his energy seemingly exhausted by this admission. "She saw everything, you understand. She was there, watching, as she has been watching ever since. For 40 years I have felt her presence, a cold breath on my neck, a shadow in the corner of my eye. And now she has made herself visible. Now she walks the halls of Ravenshollow once more, waiting for Christmas Eve, waiting to finish what she started. "Father, please," Eleanor began. "Let him speak, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "Sir Reginald, I must ask you to be more specific. When you say you killed Catherine Blackwood, what exactly do you mean?" "I mean that I pushed her from that window." Sir Reginald's voice was flat, dead, as though he were reciting facts from a history book rather than confessing to a crime. "I pushed her, and I watched her fall, and I told everyone she had jumped. Suicide while of unsound mind, the coroner ruled. I let them believe it. I let them bury her in unconsecrated ground, denied a proper Christian burial, all because I could not face the consequences of what I had done." "And why did you push her?" "Because she knew." The old man's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "She knew what I had done, what Marcus and I had done. She threatened to tell our father, to expose us to the world. We would have been ruined, disinherited, cast out of society. I could not allow that. So when the opportunity arose, He broke off, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "God forgive me. God forgive me." "What did you do, Sir Reginald? What secret was worth killing for?" But before Sir Reginald could answer, the lights went out. Not gradually, not with flickering warning, but all at once, plunging the library into absolute darkness. Eleanor screamed. Sir Reginald cried out something unintelligible, and in the darkness, Poirot heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, approaching from somewhere within the house. And then a voice. A woman's voice, soft and cold as the grave. "Christmas Eve," the voice whispered. "Christmas Eve, Reginald, and then we shall meet again." The lights returned as suddenly as they had gone, and Poirot found himself standing in the centre of the library, his heart racing beneath his immaculate waistcoat. Sir Reginald had collapsed in his chair, his face the colour of ash. Eleanor was pressed against the bookshelf, her eyes wide with terror. "You see?" Sir Reginald gasped. "You see? She is here. She has always been here, and nothing can stop what is to come." Poirot smoothed his moustache with deliberate care, forcing his racing pulse to slow. "On the contrary, Sir Reginald," he said, his voice steady despite the chill that still lingered in the air. "I see only that someone in this house is playing a very dangerous game, and Hercule Poirot does not lose at games." Dinner that evening was a tense affair, despite the season's decorations and the servants' efforts to create an atmosphere of festive warmth. The dining room was vast, its long table capable of seating 30, but set tonight for only 6, the empty chairs stretching away into the shadows like accusations. In addition to Sir Reginald, Eleanor, and Poirot, 3 other guests were present. The first was Lady Blackwood, Sir Reginald's wife, a thin, anxious woman with greying hair and the perpetually startled expression of one who has spent her life walking on eggshells. She picked at her food with the air of someone who had lost all appetite for anything life had to offer. "My wife's nerves are not what they were," Sir Reginald murmured to Poirot as they took their seats. "This business with the ghost has been particularly hard on her." "I am sure," Poirot replied, observing Lady Blackwood with interest. There was something in the way she watched her husband,
not with concern, but with something closer to calculation. She was afraid, yes, but was it fear for Sir Reginald, or fear of something else entirely? The second guest was a young man introduced as Victor Blackwood, Sir Reginald's nephew, the son of the late Marcus Blackwood, who had died in the Great War. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome had it not been marred by a permanent expression of discontent. He had arrived at Ravenshollow the day before, summoned by his uncle for reasons that remained unclear. "Victor is my heir," Sir Reginald explained, "since Eleanor, as a woman, cannot inherit the estate. It seemed only right that he should be here for Christmas." "For Christmas?" Victor's laugh was bitter. "Or for your death, uncle. That is what everyone is expecting after all. The ghost of Catherine Blackwood coming to claim her vengeance. It would be quite the spectacle, wouldn't it? Very dramatic." "Victor, please," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "What? Are we not to speak of it? The elephant in the room, or should I say, the ghost in the tower?" Victor reached for his wineglass, emptying it in a single swallow. "I find it all rather fascinating, actually. A 40-year-old murder, a supernatural avenger, and a guilty man waiting for his doom. It's like something out of a penny dreadful." "You do not believe in the ghost, then?" Poirot asked. "I believe in greed, Monsieur Poirot. I believe in ambition and jealousy, and all the other motivations that make people do terrible things. Ghosts? No. Ghosts are for children and credulous fools. And yet, something is happening in this house. The lights that failed, the voice in the darkness. Tricks. Easily explained if one knows where to look. Uncle Reginald's guilt has made him susceptible to suggestion, and someone is taking advantage of that. The question is, who? And the answer, I suspect, is whoever stands to gain from his death. The accusation hung in the air, and Poirot did not miss the quick glance that passed between Victor and Eleanor, a glance that spoke of old tensions and unresolved conflicts. The third guest at the table was the most surprising, a Mrs. Helena Marsh, a woman of perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair and a bearing that suggested comfortable means and practical intelligence. She had been introduced as a distant cousin, visiting for the holidays. But there was something in the way she watched the family that suggested her presence was not entirely coincidental. "Mrs. Marsh," Poirot said during a lull in the conversation, "you have visited Ravenshollow before?" "Many times, Monsieur Poirot. My mother was a Blackwood, Sir Reginald's cousin. I spent summers here as a girl, before my marriage." Her voice was pleasant, measured, revealing nothing. "I remember Catherine, actually. She was always very kind to me." "Indeed? What was she like?" "Beautiful. Talented. She painted, you know. Quite well, actually. There are several of her works still hanging in the gallery upstairs. But she was also..." Mrs. Marsh hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There was a sadness about her, a sense of something unfulfilled. She had been engaged once, to a man she loved deeply, but it came to nothing. After that, she seemed to retreat into herself. She became more reclusive, more watchful, as though she were waiting for something. Or someone? Perhaps. I was only a child at the time. But I remember the Christmas she died. I was here, you see. My parents had brought me for the holiday celebrations. I remember the screaming when they found her body, the chaos that followed. And I remember... She paused again, her face troubled. I remember seeing something that night. A a figure in white, moving through the darkness toward the tower. You saw the ghost? I saw something, Monsieur Poirot. I have never been certain what. A trick of the moonlight, perhaps, or a genuine spectre. But I have never forgotten it. And now, 40 years later, it seems the ghost has returned. After dinner, Poirot requested a tour of the house, with particular attention to the tower where Catherine Blackwood had met her death. Eleanor accompanied him, carrying a lamp against the darkness of the unelectrified passages. The tower has been closed for years, she explained as they climbed the narrow spiral staircase. Father ordered it shut up after Catherine's death, and no one has lived in these rooms since. But recently, she shivered, though whether from cold or fear was unclear. Recently, I have seen lights burning in the window, and sounds, footsteps, voices, coming from within. You have investigated? I tried, once, but the door was locked, and when I asked Father for the key, he became agitated, almost hysterical. He forbade me from going near the tower, said it was dangerous, that the floors were unsafe. But I don't think that's the real reason. They reached the landing at the top of the stairs, where a heavy oak door stood firmly closed. Poirot examined it with interest, noting the modern padlock that secured it. A padlock that had clearly been installed recently, its brass still bright and unweathered. This lock is new, he observed. Yes, Father had it put in last month, after the ghost first appeared. He said it was to keep people out, but I think... Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. I think he was trying to keep something in. Poirot produced a small leather case from his pocket, extracted a set of slender metal tools, and went to work on the padlock with the practiced ease of one who had opened many locked doors in his career. Within moments, the lock clicked open. Monsieur Poirot, Eleanor exclaimed. Is that quite legal? Legality, mademoiselle, is sometimes an impediment to truth. And I suspect the truth lies beyond this door. The room they entered was like a time capsule, preserved in amber for 40 years. Dust lay thick upon every surface, and the air was cold and still, carrying the faint, musty scent of long abandonment. But it was not the dust that caught Poirot's attention, nor the antique furniture draped in white cloths like shrouded corpses. It was the paintings. They covered every wall, dozens of them, each depicting the same subject. A woman in white, with long, dark hair and a face of terrible beauty. In some, she smiled gently, her eyes warm and kind. In others, her expression was one of profound sorrow, tears streaming down her painted cheeks. And in one, a large canvas that hung above the fireplace, she stared out at the viewer with eyes that blazed with fury, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hands raised as though reaching through the frame to grasp the throat of whoever dared to look upon her. Catherine, Eleanor breathed. These are all paintings of Catherine. Self-portraits, I believe, Poirot said, moving closer to examine the brushwork. Mrs. Marsh said that Catherine painted. These are the work of the same hand. The technique, the style, all consistent. But they tell a story, do they not? A progression from happiness to sorrow to rage. What could have made her so angry? An excellent question, and one that may hold the key to everything that has happened, both then and now. Poirot turned from the paintings and began to examine the room more closely. Observe, mademoiselle. The dust on the floor is disturbed. Someone has been here recently,
very recently. And here, he crouched beside a small table near the window. A candle recently burned. And what is this? It was a piece of paper, folded and half hidden beneath the candle holder. Poirot unfolded it with careful fingers and read the words written there in a hand that was elegant but somehow wrong, as though the writer had been copying a style rather than using their own. 3 more days, he read aloud. 3 more days, and justice will be done. The sins of the father shall be visited upon his own head, and the innocent blood will be avenged. Catherine has waited 40 years. She will not wait any longer. Another message from the ghost? From someone who wishes us to believe it is a ghost, yes. Poirot folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. But ghosts do not write with ink and paper, mademoiselle. Ghosts do not light candles or leave footprints in the dust. What we have here is a very human hand, playing upon your father's guilt and your family's fear. The question is, to what end? To kill my father, surely. The messages have been clear. To threaten your father, certainly. But threats and actions are not always the same thing. Someone wants Sir Reginald to believe he will die on Christmas Eve. Whether that someone actually intends to kill him or merely to torment him remains to be seen. They descended from the tower in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. At the base of the stairs, Eleanor turned to Poirot with an expression of desperate hope. You will save him, won't you, Monsieur Poirot? Despite what he did, despite his confession, you will still try to save him? Poirot met her eyes with the calm certainty that had solved 100 cases and brought justice to 100 victims. I will find the truth, mademoiselle. That is what I do. Whether your father can be saved... He paused, his expression grave. That, I fear, depends upon what the truth reveals. The following day dawned grey and cold, with fresh snow falling heavily from a sky the colour of lead. The roads, Tompkins informed them at breakfast, were becoming impassable. The telephone lines were down, and the nearest village was now cut off by drifts that reached higher than a man's head. Ravenshollow was isolated, its inhabitants trapped together as surely as if they had been locked in a prison cell. A classic situation, Poirot murmured to himself, stirring his coffee with precise movements. The closed circle of suspects, the impossible escape, the approaching deadline. Whoever is orchestrating this drama has a fine sense of the theatrical. Sir Reginald did not appear for breakfast. His wife reported that he had passed a sleepless night, tormented by nightmares, and had finally fallen into an exhausted slumber just before dawn. Victor Blackwood ate his eggs with studied indifference, while Mrs. Marsh made polite conversation about the weather, and Eleanor stared out the window at the falling snow, her coffee growing cold in its cup. Poirot used the morning to continue his investigation, beginning with a careful examination of the house's electrical system. The failure of the lights during his first encounter with the ghost had been too convenient to be coincidental, and he wanted to understand how it had been accomplished. The answer, when he found it, was almost disappointing in its simplicity. The main electrical panel was located in a small room off the servants' corridor, accessible to anyone who knew where to look. A single switch controlled the power to the library and adjoining rooms. A second controlled the tower. It would have been a simple matter for someone to cut the lights, deliver the ghostly message through a speaking tube or hidden phonograph, and restore the power before anyone could investigate. You have discovered something, Monsieur Poirot?
Tompkins had appeared behind him, silent as a cat, despite his advanced years. I have discovered how the trick was done, yes. What I have not yet discovered is who performed it. Poirot turned to face the butler, his keen eyes searching the man's weathered face. You have served this family for 40 years, Tompkins. You were here when Catherine Blackwood died. I was, sir. A terrible night. I shall never forget it as long as I live. Tell me what you remember. The butler's expression became distant, his mind travelling back across the decades. It was Christmas Eve, sir. There had been a party, a grand affair, with guests from all over the county. Miss Catherine had seemed in good spirits at the beginning of the evening, but as the night went on, she became withdrawn. I saw her speaking with Master Reginald and Master Marcus in the library, and whatever passed between them, it left her greatly distressed. Did you hear what was said? No, sir, but I saw her face when she emerged from that room. She looked... Tompkins paused, searching for the right word. She looked as though her heart had been broken. And there was something else in her expression too, something like determination. And then? She went to the tower, sir. Said she wished to be alone, to think. No one thought anything of it. She often retreated there when she was troubled. The party continued without her. And then, shortly before midnight, the butler's voice faltered. We heard the screaming. One of the maids had looked out the window and seen something falling from the tower. Something white. Miss Catherine, in her white dress. Yes, sir, we found her on the stones below, quite dead. The window of the tower room was open, and there was a note in her hand, saying she could no longer bear the shame and wished only for oblivion. A suicide note? So it was determined at the inquest. But there were those who wondered, sir. Miss Catherine was a woman of strong faith. Suicide is a mortal sin. It seemed unlike her to choose such an end. Did you share these doubts at the time? It was not my place to share anything, sir. I was merely a servant. But I kept my eyes open, and I remembered what I had seen. Tompkins hesitated, his old face troubled. Master Reginald was not in the ballroom when the screaming began, sir. I know this because I was looking for him. I had a message to deliver from one of the guests. He appeared from the direction of the servants' corridor, and his hands... Another pause. His hands were shaking, sir, and there was something on his cuff. A stain. I did not think much of it at the time, but afterward, when I considered... You believed the stain might have been blood. I did not say that, sir. I did not think it at the time. But yes, looking back, it might have been. It might well have been. Poirot thanked the butler and dismissed him, his mind working through the implications of what he had heard. Sir Reginald's confession took on a new dimension now. Not just the guilty ravings of a man tormented by conscience, but a statement corroborated by physical evidence and observed behaviour. The question was no longer whether he had killed Catherine Blackwood, but why? And the answer to that question, Poirot suspected, lay in the secret that Sir Reginald had refused to reveal. The secret that Catherine had threatened to expose. The secret of two brothers, Poirot murmured, pacing the length of the servants' corridor. Reginald and Marcus, united in guilt. But Marcus is dead, killed in the war. Whatever he knew, he took to his grave. Unless... His eyes narrowed. Unless he told someone before he died. Victor Blackwood, Marcus's son, a young man with a claim on the estate and an obvious resentment toward his uncle. Could he be the one behind the ghostly apparitions?
Could he have discovered his father's secret and decided to use it for his own purposes? It was a theory, but only a theory. Poirot needed more evidence, and he knew exactly where to look. The family archives were housed in a small room adjacent to the library, accessible through a door that had been locked but yielded easily to Poirot's practiced hand. Inside, he found decades of accumulated documents, account books, correspondence, legal papers, all the detritus of a wealthy family's life. It took him several hours of painstaking search, but eventually he found what he was looking for. It was a letter dated December 20, 1888, 4 days before Catherine's death. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, and unmistakably the same hand that had created the self-portraits in the tower. It was addressed to someone whose name had been carefully cut out of the paper, leaving only a rectangular hole where the recipient's identity should have been. "My dearest," Poirot read aloud, his voice soft in the dusty silence. "I have discovered something terrible, something that will change everything. Our suspicions were correct. The documents prove it beyond any doubt. Reginald and Marcus are not who they claim to be. The true heir to Ravenshollow is someone else entirely, someone who has been robbed of his birthright and his future. I must tell Sir Edmund the truth. He deserves to know that his own sons are impostors, and that the real heir has been living in obscurity all these years. I will speak with him on Christmas Eve, after the party. Whatever happens, the truth must come out. With all my love, Catherine." Poirot set down the letter, his mind racing. Not a simple murder, then. Not even a crime of passion or impulse. This was something far more calculated. A conspiracy to suppress the truth about the Blackwood inheritance. A conspiracy that had required the death of an innocent woman to maintain. "Reginald and Marcus were not the true heirs," he said to the empty room. "They were impostors, or believed to be impostors by Catherine. She discovered evidence of this and threatened to expose them. So they killed her, destroyed whatever documents she had found, and lived with the secret for 40 years. But if the brothers were not the true heirs, then who was? And what had happened to that person, the rightful lord of Ravenshollow, robbed of his birthright before he could even know he had one? The answer, Poirot realized, might explain everything. That evening, the ghost appeared again. They were gathered in the drawing room after dinner, Sir Reginald, pale and trembling, supported on either side by his wife and daughter. Victor, lounging in an armchair with a glass of brandy. Mrs. Marsh, sitting quietly by the fire, her knitting needles clicking steadily in the silence. Poirot stood by the window, watching the snow continue to fall, his mind still churning with the implications of Catherine's letter. It was Mrs. Marsh who saw it first. Her knitting fell from her hands, and she pointed toward the doorway with a trembling finger, her face the colour of chalk. "There," she whispered. "There. Look." They all turned. And there, framed in the doorway, stood a figure in white. It was a woman, or the semblance of a woman, dressed in a flowing gown of antique design, her long dark hair hanging loose about her shoulders. Her face was pale, luminous in the dim light, and her eyes were dark pits of shadow, empty and accusing. She stood motionless, silent, her gaze fixed on Sir Reginald with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to the guilty soul beneath. Sir Reginald screamed. It was a terrible sound, the sound of a man confronting his worst nightmare, the embodiment of 40 years of guilt and terror. He clutched at his chest, his face contorting, and collapsed backward into his chair. "Father!" Eleanor rushed to his side, but the ghostly figure raised one pale hand, and the lights went out once more.
In the darkness, chaos erupted. Someone screamed, Lady Blackwood perhaps, or Mrs. Marsh. Furniture crashed, glass shattered. And through it all, that soft, terrible voice spoke again, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tomorrow, Reginald. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Tomorrow we settle accounts. And then silence. Absolute, profound silence, broken only by the sound of Sir Reginald's laboured breathing and Eleanor's soft sobs. When the lights returned, restored, Poirot noted, within 30 seconds, the ghostly figure had vanished. Sir Reginald lay in his chair, still conscious, but barely, his face grey, his pulse weak and thready when Poirot pressed his fingers to the old man's wrist. "He needs a doctor," Eleanor said, her voice desperate. "We must get him to a doctor." "The roads are impassable," Victor reminded her, his voice surprisingly steady. "No one is coming in or out of Ravenshollow tonight. If Uncle Reginald dies, he dies here, among family."
"Victor!"
Lady Blackwood's voice was sharp.
"How can you say such things?"
"I'm merely stating facts, Aunt. We are trapped here, in a house haunted by a vengeful spirit, with a man who confessed to murder and is now, apparently, receiving his just punishment. If that's not the setup for a ghost story, I don't know what is." "Enough!" Poirot's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. "Help me get Sir Reginald to his room. He needs rest and quiet. And then..." His green eyes swept over the assembled company, sharp and assessing. "Then I believe it is time for some honest conversation." Sir Reginald was carried to his bed, attended by his wife and daughter. Tompkins was dispatched to prepare a sleeping draught, and in the library, by the light of the fire, Poirot gathered the remaining suspects and began his interrogation. "Someone in this room," he said, "is responsible for these theatrical performances. Someone who knows the history of this house, who has access to its secrets, and who stands to gain from Sir Reginald's death. I intend to discover who that person is." Victor laughed. "You're looking at the obvious suspect then, the nephew who inherits everything. How convenient for me if Uncle Reginald dies of fright before he can change his will." "You admit it, then?" "I admit nothing except my motive. But motive is not proof, Monsieur Poirot. I have heard of your methods. You require evidence, and I have given you none." "On the contrary, you have given me a great deal." Poirot's gaze moved to Mrs. Marsh, who had resumed her knitting, with hands that trembled slightly. "And you, madame? What is your interest in these proceedings?" "I told you. I am a cousin of the family, visiting for Christmas." "You told me also that you were here in 1888, when Catherine Blackwood died. That you saw a figure in white moving toward the tower. But you did not tell me that you were Catherine's closest confidant, that she wrote letters to you, sharing her discoveries, her fears, her plans." Mrs. Marsh's knitting needles stopped. "How do you know that?" "I found a letter in the archives. A letter from Catherine, addressed to someone whose name had been removed. But the tone of that letter, intimate, trusting, full of secrets shared between close friends, suggested someone who knew Catherine well, someone to whom she would reveal her most dangerous discoveries. You, Mrs. Marsh, are that someone, are you not?"
The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Mrs. Marsh set down her knitting and met Poirot's gaze with an expression that mingled defiance and resignation. "Yes," she said quietly. "Catherine was my dearest friend. We had known each other since childhood, and we shared everything."
Including the secret she discovered just before her death. The secret about the Blackwood heirs. Yes, Sir Edmund Blackwood's sons, Reginald and Marcus, were not his biological children. His wife had been unfaithful, had borne twins by another man, and had passed them off as the rightful heirs to Ravenshollow. The true heir, Sir Edmund's legitimate son by a previous marriage, kept secret because of some scandal surrounding the mother, was sent away as a child and grew up not knowing his birthright. And this is what Catherine discovered? She found the documents, letters, a journal, a legal affidavit, hidden in the tower room, where Sir Edmund had concealed them after discovering the truth. He had intended to disinherit the impostors and restore his true heir, but he died before he could act. And so the false heirs remained, and the true heir was lost. Until Catherine threatened to reveal everything. She was going to tell Sir Edmund's solicitor. She had arranged a meeting for the day after Christmas. But Reginald found out, I don't know how, and he killed her to keep her silent. He destroyed the documents, buried the evidence, and let the world believe she had taken her own life. Poirot nodded slowly. And now, 40 years later, someone is using this knowledge to torment Sir Reginald, to make him believe that Catherine's ghost has returned for vengeance. His eyes moved between the two remaining suspects. The question is, which of you is responsible? Not me, Victor said quickly. I knew nothing of this until tonight. My father never spoke of it, never even hinted. Your father was complicit in Catherine's murder. Perhaps he shared the secret with you before he died. Perhaps you have been planning this revenge for years. Planning? Victor's laugh was bitter. I am not the planning sort, Monsieur Poirot. I am the drinking sort, the gambling sort, the living beyond my means sort. If I wanted to kill my uncle for his money, I would do it directly, not waste time with elaborate ghost stories. And you, Mrs. Marsh? The woman's eyes were wet with tears. Catherine was my friend. I have mourned her for 40 years. Yes, I knew the truth. Yes, I have always known that Reginald killed her. But I am not a murderer, Monsieur Poirot. I came here this Christmas hoping that after all this time, justice might finally be done. When the ghost began appearing, I thought perhaps... She shook her head. It doesn't matter what I thought. I am not the ghost. I am merely an old woman who has waited too long for justice. Poirot studied them both, his brilliant mind sifting through evidence, weighing probabilities, constructing and discarding theories. There was something he was missing, something crucial, and he could feel it hovering at the edge of his awareness, tantalizingly close, but not yet grasped. Very well, he said at last. We will speak again tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest that no one venture out alone, and that all doors remain locked. If our ghost intends to strike on Christmas Eve, we must be prepared. That night, Poirot did not sleep. Instead, he sat in his room, a single candle burning on the table before him, and reviewed everything he had learned. The murder of Catherine Blackwood, the secret of the false heirs, the threatening messages, the ghostly apparitions, the approaching deadline. Someone wanted Sir Reginald dead. That much was clear. But who? And more importantly, why now? After 40 years, what had changed to make this the moment for revenge? The answer came to him just as the clock struck 3. Came with the sudden clarity of a lightning flash, illuminating everything that had been hidden in shadow. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "But of course, it has been staring me in the face all along." He rose from his chair, extinguished his candle, and moved silently through the darkened house toward the one room that held the final piece of the puzzle. The tower. Catherine's tower, where everything had begun and where everything would end. The tower room was as he had left it, dusty, cold, filled with the accusing eyes of Catherine's self-portraits. But this time, Poirot was not looking at the paintings, he was looking at the floor. "Footprints," he murmured, crouching to examine the dust. But not just any footprints. These are fresh, made within the last few hours. And they lead. He followed the trail with his eyes. They lead to the fireplace. The fireplace was massive, built of the same dark stone as the rest of the tower, its hearth cold and empty. But when Poirot examined it more closely, he noticed something odd. The back wall of the fireplace was not solid stone. It was a panel, a cleverly concealed door that swung open at his touch to reveal a narrow passage beyond. A priest hole, Poirot said to himself, or perhaps something older. A secret way, known only to those who have lived in this house for many years. He squeezed through the opening and found himself in a small chamber, barely large enough for 2 people to stand. And there, in the flickering light of his candle, he found what he was looking for. A dress. A white dress, of antique design, carefully preserved and hanging from a hook on the wall. A wig of long, dark hair. And a photograph of a young woman with a face that Poirot recognized instantly. "Catherine Blackwood," he whispered, but not as she was, as someone else wishes her to be. He examined the photograph more closely and saw, written on the back in a neat, feminine hand, "Mother, 1887. Not Catherine herself then, but someone connected to her, someone who had inherited her face, her features, her rightful claim to Ravenshollow. And in that moment, everything became clear. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night, leaving behind a world transformed into a crystal wonderland of snow and ice. The sun rose over Ravenshollow Manor, its pale winter light streaming through the windows of the drawing room, where the household had gathered at Poirot's request. Sir Reginald sat in the largest armchair, wrapped in blankets despite the roaring fire, his face the colour of old parchment. Lady Blackwood hovered at his side, her thin hands never still, her eyes darting nervously from face to face. Eleanor stood by the window, her expression tense, while Victor lounged against the mantelpiece with his customary air of studied indifference. Mrs. Marsh sat quietly in a corner, her knitting abandoned in her lap, her attention fixed on Poirot with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice carrying the measured authority of one who holds all the cards. "I have asked you to gather here this morning because I have solved the mystery that has haunted this house. I know who has been impersonating the ghost of Catherine Blackwood. I know why, and I know..." He paused, his green eyes sweeping over the assembly. "I know who killed her 40 years ago, on a Christmas Eve very much like this one."
"We already know who killed her," Victor said. "Uncle Reginald confessed. Case closed, wouldn't you say?"
Sir Reginald confessed to pushing Catherine from the tower window. But that is not the whole truth. There is more to this story. Much more. And it is time for all of it to be told.
Poirot moved to the centre of the room, positioning himself where he could see every face, every reaction.
Let us begin with the crime of 1888. Catherine Blackwood discovered a secret that threatened to destroy the Blackwood family. She learned that Sir Edmund's sons, Reginald and Marcus, were not his biological children. They were the offspring of Lady Blackwood's affair with another man, passed off as legitimate heirs to avoid scandal. The true heir, Sir Edmund's son from a secret first marriage, had been sent away as a child and was living in obscurity,
unaware of his birthright.
"This is all speculation," Lady Blackwood protested. "You have no proof."
"I have Catherine's letter, madame, and the documents she referenced have been found. They were not destroyed, as Sir Reginald believed. They were hidden, by Catherine herself, before she died, in a place where she knew they would eventually be found."
"Where?"
"In the frame of one of her self-portraits. She was a clever woman, Catherine Blackwood. She knew that her life was in danger, and she took precautions. The documents have been in the tower all along, waiting to be discovered." Sir Reginald made a strangled sound.
40 years, he gasped. 40 years, and they were there the whole time.
"You were not meant to find them, Sir Reginald. They were meant for someone else. For the true heir, or for those who would fight on his behalf." Poirot turned to Mrs. Marsh. "Is that not so, madame?" The older woman met his gaze steadily. "Yes. Catherine wrote to me before she died, told me where she had hidden the documents, asked me to retrieve them if anything happened to her. But when I tried..." Her voice caught. "When I tried to reach Ravenshollow after her death, I was turned away. Sir Reginald had given orders that no one from the outside was to be admitted. By the time I was able to return, years later, the tower had been sealed. I could not get in. Until now. Until now. When I received the invitation to Christmas at Ravenshollow, I knew this was my chance. I had waited so long, Monsieur Poirot. So many years, keeping Catherine's secret, honouring her memory. I thought if I could finally retrieve the documents, I could expose the truth, bring Sir Reginald to justice for what he had done. And the ghost, was that your doing as well?" Mrs. Marsh shook her head. "No. I swear to you, no. When I arrived and saw the ghostly apparitions, I was as frightened as anyone. I thought..." She paused, confusion crossing her face. "I thought perhaps it truly was Catherine's spirit, returning to finish what she had started." "But you know now that it was not a spirit. You know who has been wearing Catherine's dress, speaking with Catherine's voice, tormenting this household with threats of vengeance." Mrs. Marsh's eyes widened. "No, I don't." "Then allow me to enlighten you." Poirot turned to face the window, where Eleanor Blackwood stood silently, her face pale but composed. "Miss Blackwood, or should I say, Miss Ashford, the true name of Catherine Blackwood's daughter." The room erupted. Victor straightened from his slouch, his face a mask of shock. Lady Blackwood clutched at her husband's arm with a cry, and Eleanor remained perfectly still, her eyes meeting Poirot's with an expression that held neither surprise nor denial. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "The photograph in the tower, the one that showed Catherine as a young woman, with Mother
written on the back. You inherited her face, mademoiselle. Her eyes, her colouring, her height. When I saw that photograph, I knew I was looking at your mother, and from there, the rest was simple deduction.
But Eleanor is my daughter.
Sir Reginald's voice was a rasp of disbelief.
She cannot be.
She is not your daughter, Sir Reginald. She is the daughter of Catherine Blackwood and her fiancé, the man she loved before he was driven away by your family's machinations. Catherine was pregnant when she died, but the child did not die with her. She was born in secret, raised in obscurity, and told nothing of her true heritage until she was grown. How? Lady Blackwood whispered. How is that possible? Because I saved her.
Mrs. Marsh's voice was steady now, her face transformed by something that might have been pride or grief. When Catherine knew she was going to die, when she realised that Reginald would not let her leave Ravenshollow alive, she came to me. She told me about the baby, begged me to protect her child when she was gone. And I did.
I arranged for Catherine to give birth in secret, in a cottage on the estate, attended only by a midwife I trusted. When Catherine went to the tower that night, she knew she might not survive. She had already said goodbye to her daughter. The baby, Eleanor, was taken away that same night, Poirot continued. Raised by a distant relative of Mrs. Marsh, given a new name, a new history. She grew up knowing nothing of her true identity, until I found the letters. Eleanor's voice was clear, carrying across the room with quiet authority. My adoptive mother died last year, and among her papers, I found letters from Mrs. Marsh. Letters that explained everything. Who I really was. What had happened to my mother. What Sir Reginald had done. And you came here seeking revenge. I came here seeking justice. Her eyes flashed. 40 years, Monsieur Poirot. 40 years. And the man who murdered my mother has lived in comfort, enjoyed his stolen wealth, suffered no consequences for his crime. When I learned the truth, I knew I had to act. Not to kill him. I am not a murderer, whatever you may think. But to force him to confess. To make him face what he had done. By impersonating your mother's ghost. By using his guilt against him. He believed in the ghost, Monsieur Poirot. He had been seeing her for years, in shadows, in reflections, in the faces of strangers on the street. His conscience had never let him rest. All I had to do was give that conscience a face, a voice, a physical presence. I dressed in her clothes, walked the halls she had walked, spoke the words she might have spoken. And he crumbled. He confessed to me, to her, everything. Including the murder. Including the murder. I have it all recorded, Monsieur Poirot. Every word he said, every detail of how he pushed her from that window, how he forged the suicide note, how he and his brother destroyed the evidence and silenced anyone who asked questions. It is enough to convict him, even now, even after 40 years. The room was silent. Sir Reginald had closed his eyes, his face slack with something that might have been despair or relief. Lady Blackwood wept silently. Victor stared at Eleanor with an expression of dawning comprehension. "You're the true heir," he said slowly. "If Reginald and Marcus were illegitimate, and you are Catherine's daughter..." Catherine was Sir Edmund's legitimate daughter by his first marriage, adopted by the family and raised as his sister after her mother's death. She was the true heir to Ravenshollow, and now I am. The documents prove it beyond any doubt. Which means that everything, the house, the estate, the fortune, belongs to me. Not to you, Mr. Blackwood. Not to any of you. To me, and to the memory of the mother who was murdered trying to protect my birthright. Poirot raised a hand, commanding silence. These are matters for the courts to decide. What concerns me now is the question of Sir Reginald's fate. You have threatened to kill him on Christmas Eve, mademoiselle. The messages were clear. Do you intend to carry out that threat? Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. I am not a murderer, Monsieur Poirot. I told you. The threats were meant to break him, to force him to confess. Now that he has confessed, now that the truth is known, there is no need for further action. The law will take its course. He will answer for what he did. And if the law is insufficient, if, after 40 years, there is not enough evidence to convict, then he will live with the knowledge that the world knows what he did, that his name will be forever associated with murder and conspiracy, that his descendants— She glanced at Victor, her expression cold. That his so-called descendants will inherit nothing but shame. Sir Reginald opened his eyes. I deserve it, he said, his voice barely audible. Everything she says, I deserve it all. I have known that from the beginning. Catherine's ghost has haunted me for 40 years, and now— He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that spoke of lungs giving out, of a body finally surrendering to its long burden of guilt. Now, I am glad it is over. Whatever happens, I am glad.
Then let us end this, Poirot said quietly. Let the police be summoned. Let the truth be told. And let this house, this cursed, haunted house, finally know peace. But even as he spoke, he knew that peace would not come easily to Ravenshollow. Some wounds run too deep for healing. Some secrets, once revealed, leave scars that never fade. The ghost of Catherine Blackwood had been exorcised, but her memory would linger in these halls forever. And that, perhaps, was justice enough. Christmas Day at Ravenshollow was unlike any the house had ever known. The police had been summoned as soon as the roads became passable, and Sir Reginald had given his full confession, signing documents that would ensure his arrest and trial. He seemed, in those final hours, almost relieved, as though the burden he had carried for 40 years had finally been lifted, even if the price of that relief was his freedom and his life. Eleanor, now recognised as the rightful heir to the Blackwood estate, had declined to press charges for the more recent events. The ghostly impersonation, the threatening messages, the emotional manipulation of a dying man, all of these, she argued, were merely the means by which justice had been served. The police, after much deliberation, agreed. Victor Blackwood left Ravenshollow on Christmas morning, his face a mask of bitter resignation. He had come expecting to inherit everything. He left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that his entire life had been built on a foundation of lies and murder. What would become of him, Poirot did not know and did not particularly care. Some stories end without resolution, and this was one of them. Lady Blackwood remained at her husband's side, her loyalty to him undiminished despite everything. She had known nothing of the original crime, she insisted, and Poirot believed her. She was guilty only of willful blindness, of choosing not to see what was plainly before her eyes. That, too, was a kind of crime, but not one that could be punished by law. Mrs. Marsh stayed at Ravenshollow at Eleanor's invitation, her role as guardian and confidant finally acknowledged after decades of silence. She had kept Catherine's secret faithfully, had protected her daughter when no one else could, and now she would see the culmination of everything she had worked for.
It was, Poirot reflected, a fitting end to a long and difficult journey. As for Poirot himself, he departed Ravenshollow on Boxing Day, his work complete, his mind already turning to the next case, the next puzzle, the next exercise of those remarkable grey cells that had made him the foremost detective of his age. But, as his car wound down the drive and the great house receded into the distance, he allowed himself one final glance in the mirror. The tower window was lit again, and in it, just for a moment, he thought he saw a figure in white, a woman with long, dark hair and a face of terrible beauty, watching his departure with eyes that held something that might have been gratitude. But when he blinked, the figure was gone, and Hercule Poirot, who did not believe in ghosts, told himself firmly that it had been nothing but a trick of the light. The road ahead was long, the world was full of mysteries, and there was much work still to be done. But for now, in this moment, he was content. Justice had been served. The truth had been revealed. And somewhere in the great beyond, if such a place existed, Catherine Blackwood could finally rest in peace.
Joyeux Noël, madame, Poirot murmured as the car turned onto the main road and Ravenshollow vanished from view. And may your spirit find the peace it has so long been denied.
The snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the tracks of the departing car and blanketing the world in white. In the distance, church bells rang out their Christmas greeting, their clear tones echoing across the fells and valleys of Cumberland. And, in the tower of Ravenshollow Manor, where a woman had died 40 years before, a single candle flickered in the window. A light in the darkness, a beacon of memory, a promise that some things, once lost, could never truly be forgotten. The end. Thank you for joining us on The Little Grey Cells for another mystery with Hercule Poirot. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us what you thought of the Christmas ghost. Was Eleanor justified in her deception? Should Sir Reginald have faced justice sooner? And what do you think Poirot saw in that tower window? Until next time, keep those little grey cells active, and remember, the truth, like justice, may be delayed, but it can never be permanently denied. Happy holidays, and we'll see you in the next mystery.